What's up, Power Painters? Taylor Payton of TayPayArt.com and PowerPainters.org here, coming to you today with another Power Painters video. So, continuing with the I Draw Your Character series, this character's name is Michiko. Now, Michiko is a 5th edition D&D monk. He was submitted to me by Jonathan Avery, who emailed me at pwrpainter@gmail.com. He actually didn't comment in the YouTube section. He sent me a direct email with a little bit of background info on this character and just some really cool art that he himself had done, and a photo study as well. So I just grabbed those references, threw them into a separate document, and I was off to the races with Michiko here. So having drawn two girls already, it was nice to kind of switch it up and draw a dude. Although seems to be sort of the more pretty dude aesthetic, and I tried to kind of balance and mix that with the ferocity of him being obviously part beast in some capacity. I'm not sure if it's cat because I don't see a tail, maybe bobcat, but he does have a fang coming out, so I just decided to keep that fairly subtle because if you have a huge like snarly snaggletooth, that can ruin some of like the pretty boy aesthetic, obviously, that we're going for here. And instead we just sort of keep it pretty low key, like I'm a half beast dude or whatever. It's no big deal. I actually don't know too much about uh, the D&D 5th edition like beast classes, if there are any. I haven't seen any of the books for unless it's homebrew or something. But either way, what I'm doing right now is just sketching in the figure. So I'm using his reference that he sent me and the design of the monk, which I think is pretty sweet and pretty monk-like. The shorts are a little bit like Kingdom Hearts, I feel. It wasn't completely fantasy, but maybe a teeny bit more modernized because those feel a little bit like sort of clothy jean-like. So I think that I implemented that fairly well, and I just was sketching around until I could find a pose with him and his weapon, sort of a trident spear type thing. Pretty sweet color scheme here with the sort of tan and blue, and it's just sort of the browns working their way in. My biggest concern was just establishing a solid enough sketch to get a second version on top of. Now, this full piece probably took me about an hour and 20 minutes, maybe. Yeah, I think the before the time lapse it was about an hour 15, hour 20 minutes because it's more full body than the other ones that I had drawn, and when you have more of the body in the frame, you have more to figure out, obviously. So what I'm doing here is just, constructing all these different bits and knowing where I'm going to be emphasizing different aspects, like the way that that particular piece of cloth is draped over his body. To me, it was sort of a neat X shape that meets in the middle. It's sort of cleaved at the top, and there's a lot of his collarbone and upper chest and stuff hanging out. And I thought that was pretty neat because you can see sort of the belt. But to me, I sort of it made more sense to have the cloth being held up by the belt because that way it wouldn't fall all down and you'd be able to have a little more protection and a little more movement when it came to wielding that spear around that trident. A little bit more of the design that he had in the Jedi version, which I think is pretty sweet, by the way, Jonathan. The Jedi version's pretty tight, and I was referencing it here at this point. So yeah, basically I'm just kind of roughing that top piece of cloth in, and since the drapery is so interesting, I wanted to make sure that it still gave you that sort of V-neck cut because we want a lot of sharp shapes for this guy to show that he's dangerous. Like the pointy ears, the pointy trident, the negative space of his upper cloth piece, and the rest of it is sort of like spiked in the hair or that tiny little tooth. There's a lot of triangular shapes here to show that this is a formidable monk. Michiko is. Yeah, but a lot of this is just getting that base drawing down and checking it at several different angles, making sure that I like where it's going, lowering the hair bit down a bit, and then it was finally time to merge it and do our second drawing. So we have more certainty now. We're ready to sort of jump in with more precise line work since all the sketchiness is done. And there's a pretty neat photo study that Jonathan did that I threw into this comp. He didn't give me a link to his work, but if you're seeing this, Jonathan, then please, by all means, email me that, and I'll put it in the description box below. But yeah, this character was really fun to start drawing and just get it sort of panned out here in terms of all those little details that I can fill in with the more certain line work. I wanted to emphasize that he's got a pretty pointy bone structure. I had an easy time with that because it's similar to mine or some of the other people I've seen where the bones are close to the surface because there's not a lot of body fat. And it's really easy to show the points where the bone is closest to the skin and actually protrudes and catches light in a specific way, and you can show that with line or you can show that with value. But in this case, since this is a mostly line oriented piece, I decided to go the line work route, and we're just blocking in the face now, adding those small details and zooming in, making sure that he's looking proper vicious, proper stoic. He seems like he really likes to go in, like he likes to go in and do some damage. I included some subtle sideburns just to help with the bestial aspect, and to me the portrait looked like they had them as well because they're wrapping around the face quite a bit. I don't think that's something you can really do with hair, even if it's like a super, unless it's like a super clean bob cut or something. But yeah, it was fairly easy to finish up the lines because I had worked up the initial sketch enough to know where I was going, and my hand and wrist were already familiar with the movements I was going to make. It's just smart to have a second sketch at the ready just to become more clear on the ideas that you were setting down. But yeah, most of the design work is pretty much done by this point. It's just a matter of emphasizing the details. One way I liked to break up the shapes of the jeans was to include some slight like armoring on the sides, and that allowed me to push in some of those vertical lines in there as well that you see that are really subtle in the reference that Jonathan sent me. And then it was time to just configure that hand really quick. Just get that trident in there. But you can see that it's a pretty sketchy style just because I want something that looks a little rough yet refined enough to obviously read and still has that kind of appeal. I like to balance the roughness with the polish, and if I can implement some of the earlier steps into the piece, even if it's only 10%. But as we're moving forward here, a lot of it was just getting in the larger shapes and then working on the details, running the contours because that's what lines are for, the contours being the outer edge of any given aspect that is enclosing the space. So the shape of a trident or, the figure of Michiko here. I was working on some background elements just to see if I can get a better frame around the character, like some interesting graphic design. And I end up going with a different, more lunar looking design. For some reason, I was thinking maybe more like canine like as I approached the ending of the piece. Like it, since I don't see a tail, I think there are dogs with pointy ears that don't have very long tails either. So I feel like the more canine oriented aspects worked really well. And I could have kept the rectangle, but the moons that you're going to see appear near the end are also pretty nice visually, and I think that they contrast the character nicely. So now we're laying in flats using the lasso tool to enclose the area, go around the perimeter or the contour, and I just use a fill to get it all in there. And a lot of this is just, like I said, this is basically the third time drawing it because the first time is the sketch, the second time is the revised sketch, and the third time is circling certain parts. I mean, circling for lack of a better phrase, I suppose. Like I said, running the contour or enclosing every little bit and then adding a flat, like you saw me do in previous videos. It's a nice quick way to get some colors in if you're not going to fully paint something or if you're going for more of a comic-y style or something. I've grown pretty accustomed to this process, and there's a lot you can do once you have flats laid in, even if you are going to paint it, because then you can just mask the pieces, and you won't paint outside those lines that you've created. And you can just carve form that way, which can be pretty convenient and a good way to augment your process and the speed for your process. Once I have all the flats laid in, then I start testing out some ways to get shadow. And I think I enjoyed Multiply the most. That's my go-to for shadow layers. And once I liked the way that that Multiply was looking, and I decided the direction of my light source, it was time to lay in some areas where light is being omitted from, just to add more dimension and depth to the character, because right now it's just flats. So I do that the same way I did with the lasso tool. And now you can see immediately there's much more dimension. There are parts that are receding and parts that are coming forward because we've used tone to separate things. I go over that a lot on the YouTube channel or in the beginner painting course or the beginner drawing course. But yeah, then I decide that it's just time to sort of start doing the little details now that it's mostly blocked in. And I wasn't really feeling that background symbol, so I took that away later. Right now we're colorizing lines. I decided to go with a super subtle, very dark, warm color. And then I'm testing different ways after I flatten the colors to get a little more dimension in there. One way is with a gradient that sort of mirrors the way that I've set up the light source here. And lastly, we are adding some small highlights just to further push the forms. Because we've already pushed them back, now we can draw them forward. I usually pick a pretty even tone for the flats so that they can either be pushed or pulled. So 50% as far as values are concerned. So there's the lunar shape I was talking about earlier, and I feel like it's a much more interesting symbol because everything was very straight and vertical already. We needed some curves to contrast it and make him seem even stronger. And then I create a copy of the flats layer. I lock the transparency, use a Gaussian blur, and fill it all in with a dark color, and then just use it as a pseudo shadow, which is a nice quick technique. Now he's even more separate from the wall, and it gives a little more context to the piece. It's just a nice little quick way to rock out your characters and to have sort of a nice balance between the sketchy and the more finished. And yeah, that's pretty much it for Michiko here. This is the last few touches before I wrap it up. Add a slightly cooler color to it, just because the warm greens didn't really showcase enough of that dimension and volume for me. I wanted some cooler colors. But yeah, that's pretty much this piece. I hope you enjoy it, specifically Jonathan, or all of you power painters watching. You learn something about, how you can bring your characters to life, what you can use in terms of a quick sketching process, and adding flats, using the lasso tool, speeding up your process, trying to level up and hustle your skills up so that you can continue to produce and get the ideas that are inside you out so everyone else can see them. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video where we will be drawing even more characters. Yeah, I suppose that's it. This has been Taylor Payton of TayPayArt.com and PowerPainters.org signing off. Happy drawing, Power Painter.